You will never, ever, ever grind your way to a creative idea or a great song. Let me tell you why. How many times have you heard the advice, treat your art like a business? This seems to be the only mantra on offer for creatives that are looking to scale their processes and improve what they do. And this is great advice. It's a good idea to treat anything like a business, to bring that sense of accountability, purpose, and drive to what you're doing. But what about all the parts of creativity that are nothing like a business? What happens when I try to play a nonlinear game with a linear mindset? This business-centric advice is well-intentioned, but it often misses the mark for creatives. The Sigma grind set side of the internet has seeped into the creative self-help discussions, and a lot of creatives don't have the context or experience to know when these types of messages are helpful or applicable. Now, I won't say that grinding has no place in art or creativity because that is obviously not true. Grinding has a place in everything. But there's more to the story, so let's go find it. The sentiment behind the mantra, treat your art like a business, is all about consistency. To run a business or be a part of one, you have to show up every day, on time, prepared to do the work in front of you at a high level. It's a grind. And that's a great way to approach anything, especially art and creativity. But the presentation of that line and that mantra can sometimes lead us to misunderstand the ways in which that approach is helpful. It isn't wrong, it's just misunderstood and often misapplied. We can't expect nonlinear outcomes from linear processes and mindsets. Some things in nature and in life behave linearly. They respond in exactly the same way with the same intensity, no matter when or how they are acted on. Think about driving on a road trip. The distance that you progress on that journey is directly proportional to the speed at which you drive and the time you spend driving. Other things are nonlinear. Their responses and behavior change depending on surrounding conditions and the inputs that are given to them. Starting a fire, like a campfire, is a great example of a nonlinear process. You can't start a fire by just adding whatever tiny amount of heat you want to whatever material you want at any level of intensity. You have to gather the right materials, set them in the right conditions, and then apply a massive burst of energy to cross the threshold of a spark to start a fire. And once that fire is started, its behavior is much different than the dead pile of wood and leaves that were there before. It behaves differently, it responds to different inputs. So to treat art like a business is to adopt the operational structure of a business. Consistent scheduling, consistent metrics, consistent goals, everything comes back to that consistency, right? But art and creativity is not a linear process. And in any non-linear process, like art and creativity, the outcome we're looking for is much less responsive to consistency than it is to intensity. To go back to the fire example, I can't start a fire by being consistent. It really doesn't matter how consistent I am. All that matters is that I cross that threshold of a spark one time to start the fire. Think of a boxer or a fighter in the ring. You can't knock out an opponent by just tapping their head consistently and consistently delivering energy. That non-linear outcome of the knockout is much more responsive to one single knockout punch that surpasses a certain threshold of intensity. Making art and being creative is the same way. You only have to create something one time. You have to surpass that threshold of creative energy and creative output once to make the thing. It's a non-linear process. Now, to be clear, I'm not talking about crafting something. That's an area of artistic discipline where consistency is the most important thing. I'm talking about receiving ideas and making decisions about what to do with them. In all of these examples of writing a song, landing a knockout punch, starting a fire, the outcome we're looking for is less responsive to consistent inputs near average intensity and is more responsive to intense outputs closer to our maximum. That doesn't mean consistency is not important here in being creative and looking for those nonlinear outcomes. Consistency is absolutely critical. It just doesn't apply to every single thing being addressed by the mantra, treat your art like a business. Linear processes and outcomes respond very well to consistent input. And there are so many aspects of being a creator that are linear and respond to that consistent work. Things like practicing your instrument or making social media content respond very well to consistency. In both of those examples, you can expect more or less linearly scaling outcomes depending on the time and work you put in. I progress on guitar in direct proportion to the time I spend practicing. Now, of course, there's a lot of ways I can, adjust the slope of that line, but ultimately at the end of the day, it's still directly dependent on time in a one-to-one fashion. So we've established that creativity is nonlinear. So what happens when I listen to this advice of treating my art like a business and kind of applying a grind set to it, and I apply that mentality to the non-linear parts of being a creative? What happens? This is the core problem of hearing this advice and just taking it at face value. We approach the non-linearities of making art with a linear, consistency-based mindset. We create this linearly scaling expectation of, if I spend 5 hours working on a song, it should be 5 hours good. But that's not ever going to happen. It's a nonlinear process. We set up this expectation that is impossible to meet. Our experience of anything in life is the difference between our expectation and the reality of that experience. The reality of creating things is nonlinear and unpredictable. There is no way you can schedule when you're gonna have ideas. You can't predict how good the next thing you make is going to be. It's impossible. It's never going to happen. I could spend 200 hours on a demo that I will never release, or I could write a chart-topping hit in 5 minutes. There's just no way I could ever know how and when that's going to happen. So when I hear the advice, treat my art like a business, and I just take that in, I start applying that to the creative non-linear parts of being a creator. That comes with an expectation of linearly scaling outputs in all the domains where I apply that expectation. And when I'm consistently grinding and working on my art and my craft, but I don't see the songs and the ideas scaling in a linear fashion, I get disappointed because my experience of creating is the difference between my linearly scaling expectation and the reality of a non-linear process where nothing could happen for months and then I have 10 ideas in one day. It's unpredictable. At this point, most people just discard this idea entirely and they feel misled, they feel like they've been led on, and they stop treating anything like a business. But that's the wrong move. What we need to do is shift our mindset and understand that treating your art like a business is the best thing you could do in the parts of your art that are like a business. We have to manage our expectations and understand how linear processes serve the nonlinear outcomes we are looking for in harmony. Like I've mentioned, consistency is critical to do anything at a high level. It's not negotiable. You have to be consistent. But I've also said that creativity is a nonlinear process that does not really respond to consistency. So why do we need to be consistent? Why can't I just work on my music whenever I feel like it, whenever I'm inspired, whenever it's convenient? Why does that not work? I see a few important ways to look at this. The first is just a very simple numbers game. If I'm looking for an unpredictable nonlinear outcome, and I simply give myself more chances to find that or experience it, well then naturally I'm going to have more of those nonlinear outcomes I'm looking for. If I just spend more time doing the thing, then I'm more likely to have that outcome. Just basic math. The second perspective is about energy and potentials, like an electrical potential. When I spend time every day working on something creative, I build up a type of static energy that can then be discharged in the right moment in the right conditions, just like starting the fire. If we didn't have the materials there, we didn't have that static potential built up, we couldn't start the fire. The same thing applies to creativity. Every time I work on something, regardless of the outcome, I'm stoking that fire. I'm building up that potential to then be released when I hit that nonlinear outcome and the right conditions are there. If I only work on things when I feel like it or when I'm inspired, then I enter every session completely dead with no momentum at all. It would be like a professional pitcher just throwing a ball when they get called into the game, right? They would enter the game with a completely dead arm, no blood flowing, no energy moving through them. It's just a recipe for failure. We can use the example of the knockout punch here. That moment is only made possible because that fighter has been preparing consistently day in and day out, training, studying, getting their mind right, and they're preparing that potential energy to be unleashed in the right moment, in the right conditions of the fight to deliver that knockout blow. It would never be possible if they just trained when they felt like it. They would enter that fight stiff and with no edge of any kind. Making art is the same way. We have to put that energy in consistently to be prepared for when that glorious idea hits us or when that right situation just brings out a great idea. We have to be ready for those moments, to honor them and give them the attention and the energy they deserve when they do arrive. So this third perspective is a bit of an esoteric one. When we show up every day consistently, regardless of what the outcome might be of that day, we're signaling to God and to the universe that we are who we say we are. We aren't attaching our effort to some outcome that we can't predict. We're honoring ourselves. We're honoring the ideas that we have been blessed with. We're taking action in alignment with who we say we are. And when we do that, the universe and the world around us will shift to put us in the right situations with the right people and in the right circumstances to have those nonlinear moments happen. We're signaling that we want it bad enough and that it's just part of who we are to do it even when it sucks sometimes, or maybe the likes aren't there, or it's not as fun that day. We do it anyway to honor ourselves and to be who we say we are. That's the point of consistency to me, really. The other two perspectives are great, but I lean on that third one a lot. It's all about honoring what I've been given and doing the things that I need to do to be in alignment with who I say I am. It's important. And the only way to do that is to be consistent. So growing up, my dad always used to tell me a quote that really summarizes this perfectly. The harder I work, the luckier I get. Really just kind of says it all. So we've established that being consistent is still crucial for nonlinear processes. But that consistency is only sustainable when we learn how to manage our expectations to avoid that situation I described earlier of linearly scaling expectations meeting unpredictable, chaotic, nonlinear realities. How do we do that? How do we manage those expectations to improve our experience? I've been making music for a long time. And in my experience of making music and doing other creative things like code and videos, expectations around what's going to come out of that process, what it's going to be like, how other people are going to receive it, the timeline that it will come about on, they're never helpful. They never improve the quality of what you end up making. They only diminish the experience of creating it by elevating the expectation and the level of that expectation further and further. It never actually makes anything better. If we constantly live in the gap between linearly scaling outcomes and the small reality of unpredictable nonlinearity of moment-to-moment creativity, we're much more likely to give up on projects and to just put the guitar down or close the notebook or laptop you're writing on or put the pencils away or whatever creative thing you're doing. You're much more likely to give up on it because that moment-to-moment experience is disappointing. Your linearly scaling expectations are just growing and growing and growing as you spend more time, but the outcomes are not there because they are unpredictable and nonlinear by nature. And we suffer for that. We suffer that difference between our expectation and the actual reality. To make this consistent effort sustainable, we have to shift our expectations and shift our metrics for success away from outcomes and towards processes. The most effective way I've found to do this is to take an audit of what are the things in your work that you can actually fully 100% control and build your metrics for success only around those things. So I cannot control how people are going to receive my work. I really cannot control what it's going to be at a fundamental level. I can't control the exact timeline it's going to happen on. I can't even control if I'm going to like that outcome or not. What I can control fully within my power as a human being are the processes that I take action with. I can control the level of energy and focus I bring to every session. I can control my attention to detail. I can control my attitudes in moment-to-moment situations. Those are things that I am fully responsible for and in complete control of. When I shift my expectations and my definitions of success towards those things that I have full control over, my experience drastically improves because I'm not trying to live up to some infinitely scaling expectation that could never ever be met. It's just not possible. I'm basing my metrics of success on what did I do? Am I being the person that I say I am? Am I giving the attention and energy that this project deserves? If I did that, if I kept my promises to myself, if I took appropriate actions in a session, then it's a successful session and I can be proud of that, regardless of what the outcome is. Maybe I spend 3 hours tonight working on some demos and absolutely nothing comes out of it. If I brought my full attention, my full focus, and I gave a sincere effort in that session, and I employed the processes that I want to use, and I executed them to a high level, that's all that matters. My experience of creating in those moments is still fully intact, and it's positive, because the expectation I brought was not based on an outcome. It was based on the things that I do, that I'm fully in control of. It's a much healthier and much more sustainable way to approach creativity. Creativity is not a grind. You should still treat your art like a business. You should be consistent. You should have standard procedures. You should have processes in place that you are familiar with, that you've audited. You should be consistent. But you're not going to grind your way to that great song. You're not going to grind your way to that next amazing book or that next amazing article. It's just not going to happen. That's not the nature of nonlinear processes. Of course you need to be consistent, like we've discussed, to keep that level of energy going so you're prepared when that moment arrives, when the conditions to start the fire or the right moment in that fight arrives to land that knockout punch. When that moment happens for you, if you aren't being consistent, it's never going to work. But we have to change the conversation around creativity, right? It's not just like a business. Like there are parts of being a musician or an author or a painter or any creative that are linear, that are business-like, that do respond well to those procedures and approaches. But creativity, raw artistic discovery is not one of them, and it's never going to be. This is something that I've struggled with for a long time, because obviously I want to get better in what I do, making music, making videos. And I try to approach things with a business mindset as well, to be consistent, to always work on my craft, study what's out there, study what's going on. It's a very healthy mindset to bring to this pursuit. But it's never helped me, ever helped me write a better song. It's never helped me have that breakthrough moment for a visual art idea or a video idea. The things that help me there are just being prepared. And I'm only able to do that because I'm shifting my expectations away from outcomes and back towards processes. I hope that you can connect with this idea as well. And I hope that you are able to find the things that you can control in your process and start building your definition of success around only those things. And I hope that your experience of creating gets better and better as you pull more of those expectations away from outcomes and back into your control. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you got something valuable out of this.